Global Television Network.
As Libya's UN-backed government calls for a truce, the rival Libyan Prime Minister exclusively tells CGTN the offensive against Tripoli could take up to 9 months. Sudanese demonstrators continued their sit-in outside the army. And the Egyptian Elections Committee has announced the dates for the referendum. Egyptians will start voting on April the 20th. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live, coming to you from Nairobi. I am Peninah Karibe. Joining me in studio is Uche with a sneak peek of what's ahead in business news.
Thanks, Peninah. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. U.S. First Daughter Ivanka Trump pushes for women's economic empowerment during her trip to Côte d'Ivoire. And a Kenyan family sues Boeing following the crash in March of an Ethiopian Airlines plane. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it's back to you, Peninah.
Thank you, Uche. Let's begin in Sudan, where former Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir has reportedly been transferred to the country's Kobar maximum security prison in the capital. Witnesses said there was a heavy deployment of soldiers and members of the paramilitary rapid support force outside the prison in North Khartoum. He is allegedly being held in solitary confinement under tight security. However, authorities have denied having Bashir in prison, and the Interim Transitional Military Council is yet to confirm his transfer. Meanwhile, a rebel group in the south of Sudan says it is ceasing all hostilities until the end of July as a goodwill gesture after the ouster of President Omar al-Bashir. The leader of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement North said the move was to give military rulers the opportunity to immediately hand over power to civilians. Meanwhile, in the capital Khartoum, protests continued despite efforts to disperse them outside army headquarters. In an apparent concession to the demonstrators, the new military ruler General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan fired 3 high-ranking public prosecutors. Before Bashir's arrest, Uganda had offered to provide asylum to the deposed leader. This is in appreciation for his role in the South Sudan peace deal. Our reporter Daniel Arap Moi has been speaking to Uganda's State Minister for Foreign Affairs and filed the following report.
Uganda's State Minister for Foreign Affairs Henry Okello-Oryem says that Kampala is willing to offer asylum to the deposed Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir. The Kampala administration says Omar al-Bashir's leadership as co-guarantor for the peace agreement of South Sudan, he has played a very critical role and must not be underestimated.
If President Bashir, like any other individuals or group of individuals, seek asylum in Uganda, definitely the government of Uganda will consider his application for asylum. We cannot just brush away his wish to seek asylum in Uganda.
Omar al-Bashir, who has ruled Sudan for 3 decades, was overthrown last week after almost 4 months of protest calling for an end to his leadership. He was also accused of failing the fight against corruption and ruling Sudanese with an iron fist. Bashir is wanted by the International Criminal Court to answer to cases of crimes against humanity that he is believed to have committed as president of Sudan during the violence in Darfur, in which an estimated 400,000 people were killed. Despite a request to state parties to the Rome Statute of the ICC to have him arrested and handed to the International Court, Uganda, just like many other African countries, has refused to effect the arrest warrant.
We don't see any reason why we should hand over Bashir to ICC. Bashir has been here many times before. We have not handed him before, and we will not hand over Bashir to ICC if we were to consider his application for asylum here.
Uganda says that what is important is for a peaceful transition of power in respect to the popular demand of the civilian population in Sudan. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
In neighboring Libya, heavy fighting has continued in Tripoli, with the death toll rising to at least 174. 756 people have been wounded, amongst them 14 civilians. 4 people were killed after a shell hit residential houses in the Abu Salim district of Tripoli. Clashes between government and eastern forces in the southern suburbs of the city involved heavy shelling, snipers and airstrikes. Humanitarian organizations are now raising alarm over the safety of detained migrants. Let's get you more on this from CGTN's Guy Henderson, who is live for us in Benghazi. Guy, fighting is said to be ongoing. Can you give us more details? How close is it to the city centre?
Well, the UN's been saying this is pretty much a stalemate, this conflict now, and the hope of the UN envoy was that perhaps that might start to bring about a rethink about the possibility of bringing both sides back to the negotiating table. Clearly, there's no sign of that happening at the moment. As you said, although it's a long way from here, Tripoli, but humanitarian agencies now reporting what they say was the heaviest night of shelling the previous night that Tripoli has seen since the beginning of the 2014 civil war, and significant civilian casualties as part of what they described as indiscriminate shelling of that densely populated area in southern Tripoli. Now, the Tripoli government is blaming General Haftar. His forces, who are based here in the east and are currently conducting this offensive into Tripoli in the west. The LNA, as it's called, which is Haftar's military units, are blaming the other side for that. So both blaming and condemning the other for those apparently indiscriminate airstrikes in heavily, densely populated civilian areas. Now, there have been repeated calls for a ceasefire, for a pause in this offensive and in this fighting, to try and allow civilians, many of them trapped, the chance to get out. Clearly, that is not happening.
And Guy, Tunisian authorities have stopped over 20 armed French diplomats who were trying to cross into the country from Libya. Do you have any details on this?
Nothing from here. I mean, it is quite an extraordinary claim. Certainly, what we do know is that the French have been providing some diplomatic support for the eastern forces, that is the forces of General Khalifa Haftar, who is based here in Tripoli. In the past, the French have provided military support, armed support for General Haftar in the form of military advisors, and that was under a counter-terrorism premise some years ago, during the height of the civil war, at a time when Islamic State were making gains in Libya, and the French saw it as a real priority to work with both sides in this conflict to try and push back those militias. But to now be hearing reports that perhaps there are armed French diplomats in the West, I don't think there's any clear message emerging yet as to why that might be. Certainly, you might think that given that it is perceived that the French have been providing at least diplomatic support to the east by, for example, insisting on the watering down of an EU statement of condemnation against Haftar's offensive into Tripoli, that perhaps that might put whatever French citizens were or might be in the west, in that western area of Libya, at a higher level of risk. But exactly why they might have been in Libya and trying to make their way out of Libya, why they might be armed, we just don't know at this stage.
All right, Guy, thank you very much for that update. Guy Henderson live in Benghazi. Now, as Libya's UN-backed government calls for a truce, the Prime Minister of the parallel government based in eastern Libya tells CGTN the offensive on Tripoli could take up to 9 months. Abdallah Al-Thani also places the blame on outside actors and takes aim at the UN itself in an exclusive interview with CGTN's Guy Henderson in Benghazi.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for joining CGTN. Let me first ask you, why has General Haftar launched this offensive on Tripoli?
الأسباب اللي أدت إلى أن The Libyan army marched to the western region because since this conflict started 8 years ago, the political Islamists have taken complete control. This conflict will continue until we see the strength of a united Libyan army from all cities come together to unify the country. This step that was taken by the army was necessary, and it had to come.
One of the criticisms internationally is that this offensive much reduces the chances of successful dialogue for a peaceful political process that is necessary for there to be lasting peace. What's your response to that?
If the UN could be realistic, how can they give someone legitimacy without getting it from the parliament of that country? Do you think Obama could be hired by another country if he was not elected by the American people, or in Germany, or any other country? The UN has its own vision. They think that Fayez Serraj will achieve their ambitions. What has the Tripoli government achieved? For example, this is the security process, kicking the militias out. Instead, they have increased, and they have more power, and they have more money.
What political process would you like to see, and how long do you think that might take? How long until, for example, we could see elections?
If the international community take their hands away and the supportive countries like Turkey stop sending their fleet and their navies to Misrata, the conflict will end soon. The militias would not have the power to resist the army. But with external support, if they give them modern weapons, the conflict will take 8 to 9 months.
It's been nearly 2 weeks since forces loyal to Commander Khalifa Haftar began their assault to seize the city. They have been battling armed groups loyal to the UN-recognized Tripoli government on the southern border of Tripoli. Libyans living on the outskirts of the city are seeking shelter in a school closer to the center of the capital. CGTN's Tuli Shabalala has more.
This old factory in Tripoli is now a makeshift shelter for civilians uprooted by conflict. More than 18,000 people have been displaced by a 2-week offensive by forces from eastern Libya trying to take the capital from the internationally recognized government.
I'm a housewife and I have 5 young ones. When the clashes broke out and the sound of bombings became strong, I knew I had to leave with the kids. After we left, we received news that some of our neighbors were killed and wounded.
Around 47 families are housed in this camp, with up to 6 individuals in each small room.
Of course, the number of families currently residing here is 11. Each family is of course made up of several members, boys and girls, and every day the numbers increase.
Many civilians have been unable to leave the southern districts of Tripoli.
Most of the displaced families are being hosted by the residents. Some people have offered their homes and comfort. Most of them are our people who came through the town borders in Wadi Rebea and an area called Lofter.
Despite the help offered by locals and businesses, for those families arriving here, authorities say it's going to be a challenge to find shelter for them as the numbers increase. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
In Egypt, the Elections Committee has announced the dates for the referendum, which will start on April 20th. The changes give the Egyptian additional powers and extends his office terms until 2030. But politicians say El-Sisi should be given a chance to complete his economic and security reform. CGTN's Adil Mahri has more.
Cairo's landscape is covered with massive numbers of banners, all encouraging citizens to vote in the upcoming referendum. On Wednesday, and just 2 days before the vote begins, the president of the Elections Committee called for huge participation as he announced the referendum details.
I tell the youth, shut your ears away from the calls of boycott and participate to voice your opinion. The people's will is more superior to the constitution. We return the matter to you to vote on. The referendum is considered one of the most important democratic rights. Your nation is calling you to say your opinion.
Egyptians will start voting on April 20th. Egyptian members of parliament say they want the president to get more time in office to complete his reform vision. Since he took office, El-Sisi has taken bold measures. He has gradually lifted power subsidies and enforced some austerity measures on the government.
The massive move in petroleum exploration has made Egypt own one of the biggest natural gas reserves in the world. The country is building 22 new cities. For the first time, Upper Egypt is building infrastructure that this region has not seen in 40 years. All this will make Egypt among the world's top 20 economies.
To increase the turnout, the ballots will be open for 3 days until April 22.
Opposition powers have rejected the constitutional amendments, but instead of their usual stance of boycotting, they have decided to vote no. So there's a huge turnout expected this weekend. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And Adil now joins us live from Cairo for more on this. Adil, the election committee has set the vote for Friday, but is there enough time to set the logistics?
Well, this one is a big question that everyone is asking about, because it just announced yesterday on Tuesday night, the Parliament has approved the final amendments in the Parliament itself. So officially, there hasn't been any prior announcement to the content of the amendments, the document that will be put in front of Egyptians to vote on. And just today, the Elections Committee, has announced an election. It was expected to be next week, by midweek maybe, but it was a surprise that just this weekend, 2 days from now, the election will be held. So it seems that they have already proceeded with the huge logistics burden of starting to print the materials. The database of the voters has been already there. It has been updated several months ago, and there's around 60 million Egyptians there. It seems that this means there won't be any significant change in the constituencies and the votes. So as Egyptians did vote last year in their ballot stations in specific places around their neighborhoods, this is where they will be going again this weekend. So there isn't much of a structural change in the logistics, and it's only about printing the documents and the voting cards in these couple of days, which is still a huge burden.
And Adil, you mentioned the opposition rejected the amendments. Why is that?
Well, basically the opposition have been looking forward to a new presidential elections within just 3 years. Initially, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's second and final term should have expired by 2022. And they were looking forward, and some of them have been actually trying to put a vision on how they will engage in politics and put an influence for the civil political parties into the presidential and the upcoming parliament elections. Now with the constitutional amendments, President el-Sisi will be staying not just 3 years, no, he will be staying for at least, not at least, but it is an average, of course, but he can stay in power up to 2030, 11 years from now, which has put a bit of frustrations on them. They believe that the Constitution, from their opinion and in previous press conferences where they have declared their rejection to the constitutional amendments, they believe that it gives exclusive powers to the president, influence over the judiciary, something that the supporters, the main coalition in the parliament, the majority coalition, have denied these claims, saying that it is maintaining the balance of powers. So these are the main points that have been quite irritating to the opposition. And on Thursday, tomorrow, they will be holding another press conference to declare their stance from the ballot boxes. Will they boycott or will they engage with a no vote, which some powers already said they will engage with a no vote. But the entire coalition of the opposition and a unified stance is maybe expected tomorrow on that issue once again.
All right, Adil Mahroui there in Cairo, thank you. And you're watching Africa Live. Coming up after the break. 150 people missing after a boat capsizes in Lake Kivu in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and IGAD member states urged to scale up drought response.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
150 people are missing after a boat sank in Lake Kivu in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. 3 bodies have been recovered and 33 people have been rescued. President Felix Tshisekedi says he is monitoring the situation to identify and sanction those responsible for the accident. Such accidents are common in the DRC, with boats being frequently overloaded.
The boat accident happened in Lake Kivu near the DRC-Rwanda border. Authorities are still searching for the missing people. DRC President Felix Tshisekedi says he's closely following the accident and is saddened by it. He says when it's been established who's responsible for the fatalities, those people will be punished. Boat accidents are common in the DRC. Last year, 50 people died in an accident on the Momboyo River in northern DRC. Authorities haven't yet established the reason for this boat that capsized. Christo Chamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
In Kenya, the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport has reopened following a bomb scare on Kenya Airways Flight 762 to Johannesburg. During an argument with the flight attendant, one of the passengers allegedly said the word bomb while the plane was already taxiing for takeoff. The ensuing panic from passengers grounded the flight and extensive security checks were conducted. The passenger who raised the alarm has since been taken into police custody. Kenya is on high alert in response to an ongoing threat from Al-Shabaab militants. The ongoing drought in the Horn of Africa is triggering a regional humanitarian crisis. The Intergovernmental Authority on Development and East African Trade Bloc is saying that over 23 million people are in need of emergency food assistance. They are urging member states to scale up drought response. Almost all of Somalia and parts of Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda and South Sudan are areas of concern. IGAD warns that these countries are likely to receive less rainfall later in the year.
Right now, those groups are being seen to be people who are in kind of a drought stress level situation, with a possibility of, with pockets of emergency almost, and of course getting into that area. So what do you want to now pass to our member states that constitute IGAD as a region? We call upon our member states to operationalize what we call their contingency plans.
The problem that we see potentially is that in the arid and semi-arid land, there is a large caseload of people, millions of people, who are in what we call IPC phase 2, the stress phase. These people are moderately meeting their daily food consumption or marginally meeting it, but they are facing some difficulties to meet their non-food expenditures, and they are very often to engage into coping strategies that are very hard on them.
Let's head back to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where President Felix Tshisekedi is urging people in areas hit by the Ebola outbreak to accept the reality of the disease and trust health workers. Mistrust of first responders and widespread misinformation propagated by some community leaders has led many in affected areas to refuse vaccinations. Instead, they turn to traditional healers whose clinics have contributed to the hemorrhagic fever spread. DR Congo has suffered 10 outbreaks of Ebola. The current outbreak has seen 814 deaths since it was declared last August.
I ask you, my countrymen, my fathers, my little brothers, listen and cooperate with the medical response teams that are working tirelessly here to eradicate this disease. If you do so, this disease will not spread everywhere anymore, and we will contain it and get rid of it completely here.
Meanwhile, health professionals in Zimbabwe are calling on policymakers to encourage healthy lifestyle and eating habits in order to curb cancer in the country. Due to high costs related to cancer treatments, many Zimbabweans often fly out of the country for treatment to countries such as India and South Africa. Health professionals say eating a healthy, balanced diet can help reduce the risk of contracting the disease. The silent killer has affected thousands of Zimbabweans.
And the main cause, which is also the main cause of cancer, the main cause of hypertension, are simply three issues. Wrong food habits, cooking habits, and eating habits. Those are the only three things that has changed this world. The way people cook, the way people eat, and the type of food we eat.
Over the decades, China's naval operations have developed from inshore defense to offshore and beyond to the open seas. The Chinese Navy is building a modernized marine combat force that can sail to all waters and conduct multiple missions. Let's now take a look at this process of reform.
The Chinese Navy began its first major reform in the 1980s when its mission shifted from inshore to offshore defense. In May 2015, China issued a white paper outlining a military strategy it calls Open Seas Protection. Chinese ships now operate further from home and for longer periods. On December 26, 2008, China sent the first naval fleet to the Gulf of Aden and waters off Somalia to defend commercial shipping from pirates. Since then, 31 fleets have escorted more than 6,600 ships from around the world. In 2015, when the war broke out in Yemen, a Chinese naval fleet consisting of 3 vessels helped evacuate more than 600 overseas Chinese and almost 300 other foreign citizens from 15 countries. In a voyage called Harmonious Mission 2015, China's hospital ship Peace Ark traveled the world for 142 days and provided free medical care and services for over 17,000 people. The Chinese Navy continues to strengthen exchanges and cooperation with other countries to protect maritime transport. It has held joint drills with more than 20 countries, practicing escort missions, anti-piracy operations, and international humanitarian assistance. Looking ahead, Chinese naval forces will continue their duties to safeguard national strategic interests, fulfill international humanitarian obligations, and defend important transport routes.
Let's now head to Nigeria, where Abuja was the place to be as delegates from China and Nigeria held a joint Belt and Road Initiative forum. The conference was organized to create a deeper understanding on the benefits that Nigeria and Africa will gain from the initiative. According to the charge d'affaires of the Chinese Embassy in Nigeria, Chow Yong, the world stands to benefit from the Belt and Road Initiative, including Nigeria and Africa at large. Trade between Nigeria and China grew by 10% in 2018, hitting $15.3 billion.
Belt and Road Initiative, though originated from China, belongs to the whole world and will benefit the people all across the world. As another end and the national extension of ancient Silk Road, and now as China's strategic partner, Africa is an indispensable part of the Belt and Road map.
Nigeria shares the objective of the Belt and Road Initiative, which aims to develop economic partnership and build a community of shared interest and responsibility and a shared future on the basis of mutual trust, economic integration, and cultural inclusiveness.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
A look now at our top stories. This a rebel group in the south of Sudan says it is ceasing all hostilities until the end of July as a goodwill gesture after the oust of President Omar al-Bashir. The leader of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement North said the move was to give military rulers the opportunity to immediately hand over power to civilians. Meanwhile, in the capital Khartoum, protests continued despite efforts to disperse them outside army headquarters. In the neighboring Libya, heavy fighting has continued in Tripoli as the death toll rises to at least 174. 756 people have been wounded, amongst them 14 civilians. 4 people were killed after a shell hit residential houses in the Abu Salim district of Tripoli. Clashes between government and eastern forces in the southern suburbs of the city involved heavy shelling, snipers and airstrikes. 150 people are missing in the Democratic Republic of Congo after a boat sank in Lake Kivu in the eastern part of the country. 3 bodies have been recovered and 33 people have been rescued. President Felix Tshisekedi says he is monitoring the situation to identify and sanction those responsible for the accident. Such accidents are common in the DRC, with boats being frequently overloaded. And in Kenya, the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport has reopened following a bomb scare on Kenya Airways Flight 762 to Johannesburg. During an argument with the flight attendant, one of the passengers allegedly said the word bomb while the plane was already taxiing for takeoff. The ensuing panic from passengers grounded the flight and extensive security checks were conducted. And that's a look at some of our top stories. All right, let's now cross over to Uche for the day's business news.
Thanks, Penny. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. U.S. First Daughter Ivanka Trump pushes for women's economic empowerment during her trip to Côte d'Ivoire. And a Kenyan family sues Boeing following the crash in March of an Ethiopian Airlines plane.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's start off with international news. U.S. President Donald Trump's daughter and senior advisor to the White House, Ivanka Trump, has met with the Vice President of Côte d'Ivoire, Daniel Kablan-Duncan, on the latest stage of her African tour. Now, the U.S. First Daughter is visiting the continent to promote the United States Women's Global Development and Prosperity Program that, of course, President Trump announced back in February. The government of Côte d'Ivoire pledged to improve conditions for women as part of the terms for a grant from the U.S. government-funded Millennium Challenge Corporation. Now, Ivanka visited Ethiopia before heading to Côte d'Ivoire. An impact investing group, Acumen, has closed a $70 million fund to back companies delivering affordable and renewable energy to mostly poor consumers in Africa. Now, the Acumen Fund seeks to provide cheap power with investments in fast-growing companies while also making competitive returns. Impact investing has been accelerating in recent years, mainly fueled by the interests of millennials as well as the threat of climate change. In Africa, millions of people don't have electricity and typically resort to dirty sources of power. Now, the fund expects to exit all of its investments in about 12 years. It now plans to supply early growth capital to help companies to gain scale in order to reach more consumers in Africa. And moving on now, a Kenyan family has filed a lawsuit in Chicago against American aviation giant Boeing over the March 10th Ethiopian Airlines crash that, of course, killed about 157 people. Now, siblings of 29-year-old engineer George Kabau said they wanted to force the company to release documents and emails relating to its 737 MAX 8 model, which was grounded worldwide following 2 major crashes in Ethiopia and Indonesia. Indonesia. Now, Kenya had the largest number of citizens on the flight from Addis Ababa to Nairobi. More wrongful death lawsuits against the U.S. plane manufacturer are expected to be filed in subsequent weeks, with a second consortium of law firms set to announce legal action later.
Yesterday, we filed a complaint on behalf of George Cabal's parents in United States Federal District Court in Illinois. And by doing that, this will allow us through the discovery process to look into Boeing's decision-making process. So our clients have retained us to find out what happened, why it happened, and to prevent this from happening in the future.
We cannot replace him, and he cannot and shall not be replaced. But we pray that by what is happening, my parents especially, and us as his siblings and all other loved ones, can use his demise to ensure safe travel for all.
Well, let's get some corporate news now. Apple and Qualcomm have agreed to settle an ongoing lawsuits, or rather all ongoing lawsuits, putting an end to the blockbuster legal battle between the two tech giants. Under the terms of the settlement, the iPhone maker will make a payment to Qualcomm for an undisclosed amount. Now, the two sides have also reached a 6-year global patent licensing agreement, which may be extended for another 2 years. Apple and Qualcomm have been fighting over Qualcomm's patent licensing practices for the last 2 years. Apple contended that Qualcomm was charging unreasonably high fees for essential patents and using its position as the dominant supplier of smartphone modems to demand those exorbitant prices. Meanwhile, electric drivetrains and self-driving tech are two of the hottest areas of research and development in the global automotive sector. Now, at this year's Shanghai Auto Show, sports cars, luxury vehicles, and even parts producers are drawing the most attention, as, of course, we see the global industry racing to make that big switch away from fossil fuels. Here's CGTN's Shan Shikwi with the details.
Some automakers have called 2019 the first boom year for autonomous driving. Such cars on the market now achieve somewhere between level 1 and 2 autonomous, meaning you can sporadically take your hands off the wheel. However, German parts maker ZF is thinking 2 steps ahead, introducing a processor that enables level 4, which means a driver need not watch the road at all.
We did a comparison with iPhones. So if you use 120 iPhones, then you can compare the processing power.
At the same time, Cadillac is planning to roll out their semi-auto drive technology that they call Super Cruise to all of its models starting 2020.
The technology is legal on 300,000 kilometers of highway across China.
All of the connecting highways between, say, Shanghai and Hangzhou or Beijing and Guangzhou, all of the major long-haul highways, you can absolutely use Super Cruise on. As the technology improves, we'll include even more highways for that experience as well.
Domestic auto sales declined in 2018 for the first time in 20 years, alarming car makers. But new energy vehicles bucked the trend. Hybrid car sales increased 118% compared to 2017, while fully electric vehicles climbed more than 50%.
Now, this year can be a critical year for Porsche down the electric route. As you can see here, they already have hybrid Cayennes and Panameras, and this September they are going to be releasing their first ever fully electric model.
We have hybrid cars which are doing very well, and also the Cayenne Coupe will be available in 2020 as a hybrid car. We are just in the preparation of our full electrical sports car coming to China in early 2020.
US-based parts maker Dana is using 50% of its exhibit space to promote items for electric vehicles. This is up from 20% just a year and a half ago.
You know, one of the reasons that we're showing so many electrified products here at Auto Shanghai this year is because we see a huge increase in demand by automakers across the world, but especially in China, selling over 1.2 million in 2018.
China makes up more than 53% of global new energy vehicle sales. Auto Shanghai will run through April 25th, showcasing more than 1,000 companies from 20 countries. Sun Ziqi, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
And still at the 2019 Shanghai Auto Show, CGTN's Cheng Lei caught up with the CEO of Porsche to get his thoughts on the company's 2019 strategic focus.
Now, many know that you're the main cash cow for the Volkswagen Group. So how much pressure is there now to cut costs and increase productivity in order for the group to achieve its profitability targets as the group invests more in electrics and autonomous technology?
Yeah, I think that's our principal need for future, looking in what we will invest in future. Therefore, we are working in a result improvement program. Because when you look to electromobility, only the material cost will be much bigger, of around in between 8,000 and 10,000 euros a car. So you have the need for the future years to do something. Our strategic goal is to maintain our profitability of about 15%.
Legendary in the industry.
Yeah. We keep working on this. I think we have a good perspective to achieve this in future.
First quarter is down 10%, and especially in Europe and even China, it's also down, by about 10%. So how's that going to affect the rest of the year? Are you hoping to have a flat year? Numbers going to be down?
The first quarter, which was below 2018, but that depends on the changes on the VAT and of the changes from C5 to C6 of the engine side. And we are expecting for this year another growth. Last year we had sales of 80,000 and this year in 2019 we will be even bigger than this.
How do you think your first full electric car, the Taycan, is going to go?
I think, first of all, we thought about 20,000 a year, and now with all the pre-orders we increased our capacity a bit, and expectation, I think we have to wait half a year when we will present the car, and then we feel, because customers haven't already seen the car.
What's interesting is that Porsche is actually part of the Belt and Road Initiative by using China Rail Express to transport cars from Germany to Chongqing in Western China, which saves transport time versus sea by about 20 days. Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, shipping our cars to China will cost us around about 50 days, and we can reduce it of about three weeks to go by the new Silk Belt crossing Asia, and I think that's very intelligent. We have about between 10 and 15% of our cars shipping by train. That's a pilot starting with, and when we will have success with this pilot, we will continue.
What are you looking to, how much are you looking to increase that to?
Yeah, we will watch how does it work, and I think at the end what counts is a result to bring our cars quicker to our customers, because a lot of our cars are tailor-made for our customers, so the waiting time is bad for the customer, and so we try to be even faster by this opportunity.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up on Global Business Africa, South Africa has suffered a massive decline over the past 12 years than any other nation not at war. Now, the startling admission is based on security, governance and prosperity indicators that compare South Africa's economic performance on an annual basis. Of course, we'll have all those details for you at the top of the hour. For now, it's back to Peninah.
Thank you, Uche. You're watching Africa Live. Coming up, alarm as sexual assaults of women in the Anglophone region of Cameroon increase.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Peninah, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
activists in Cameroon fear that the number of rape cases in the Anglophone region could be on the rise. Here's CGTN's Jen Kerr with more details.
In 2016, Rose, not her real name, was walking at night to fetch water in her village when she was attacked by 3 men who she says raped her. The 21-year-old is among hundreds of women who have suffered sexual violence and rapes in Cameroon's northern and western regions.
That time it was around 7 to 8. When they took me like that, there were 3 of them in number, and another one raped me. And I even tried to cry, but they covered my mouth. I could not. I do everything possible. There was no one to help me.
Many of the rape survivors have been coming to the Rural Women's Center for Education in Bamenda for support. The NGO provides legal, medical and psychological support to victims of sexual violence and says it has been overwhelmed by the number of women coming to the center seeking help.
Between 2016 and now, specifically between 2018 and now, rape has really been on the increase because a lot of women and girls have run to our center for assistance because they have been raped. So seeing that, we thought it wise to work closely with these women and girls by providing them psychosocial first aid, bringing in medical experts and legal experts to provide them support.
Bamenda and other cities in the northwest and southwest have become a battleground between government forces and rebels, demanding an independent state for the Central African nation's English-speaking minority. Over 400 civilians have been killed in attacks between separatist groups and government forces since the conflict started in 2016. The upsurge of violence has left many women and young girls in particular vulnerable. 12-year-old Stella, not her real name, was raped behind their house by an unknown man. She was helping her neighbor bake cakes and had gone to look for sand that is used to mold the cake and hold it in place in the baking tray.
So I went to the valley to carry her the sand. One man passed and asked me that, what school am I going to? I said, I'm going to the secondary school. The man passed and he went. Then I carried the sand and I was going. The man came and caught me and pressed me on the ground that if I shout, he's going to kill me, so he raped me.
Many of the rape victims, like Rose, have little hope left for their future.
My dream was to become an actress. And now I don't really know. And I feel like if not of this thing that is happening in this northwest and southwest, that could have not happened to me. I could have been in school by that time. I could have not been in the village, because I think that happened because I was in the village.
More than 430,000 people have been displaced within Cameroon, and over 30,000 have fled into neighboring Nigeria. Jane Kale, CGTN.
In South Africa, the constitution states that every child has the basic right to nutrition, but many children still go without a meal. In the Western Cape, a feeding scheme highlights commitment to children's rights.
Food for thought. That's literally the core business of the Peninsula School Feeding Association in Cape Town. It distributes food to nearly 150 schools in disadvantaged communities across the Western Cape.
Too many students end up going to school without food, and if you don't get that right, we're never going to get the results. So it is how we make sure that we retain students in the school system. We're now sitting at over 62% of our students are retained in the system up until matric, and over 400,000 young people get a meal every single day when they go to school.
The Peninsula School Feeding Association, which was started over 60 years ago, distributes over 130 tons of fresh produce to nearly 150 schools every week. This includes nearly 5,000 cabbages and over 500,000 apples.
4 out of 5 children every day comes to school without having anything to eat. So for us as an organization, that's our core and that's our function. That's the kids we target, so that we can make sure that that child has been provided with that meal that allows him or her to learn. Because as our logo says, you can't teach a hungry child.
Just R2.50 provides each of these grade 2 learners with 2 hot, nutritious meals every day, so they don't have to come to school and learn on an empty stomach.
In education, we have the best retention rate in our school system in South Africa, and part of it is making sure that you've got the education in place, but you've got to have children in school that have actually had a meal, and if they don't have that, they can't get the education outcome. We've got a track record on jobs, we've got a track record on education, and this is part of that education.
Renee Dalcom, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
And coming up in sports, Africa's top football nation, Senegal, begins preparations for the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The draw for the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations continues to solicit different reactions. Africa's top team and World Cup finalist Senegal say their pairing in Group C alongside Algeria, Kenya and Tanzania could provide a redemption after years of failing to lift the trophy. CGTN Sadiq Shaban has more.
A total of 24